Today, we're going to be looking at the second part of the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12. And before I get to that, I kind of want to introduce it because they're kind of related. And we get a better understanding of what Jesus is talking about when we look at the first part of chapter 12. And in that part, Jesus deals with the devastating effect of wealth, of possessions, of greed, things like that. And he warns against greed, and he starts by saying, this is the introduction, beginning of chapter 12. He says, take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, right? And he goes on, he says, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. That's kind of hard for us. I'll be honest with you, I'm one of those people who like stuff. So when I hear that, it's like, oh, that really hurts. And I don't know how to take that. And Jesus, in that verse, warns against all kinds of greed. Not just, why does he say all kinds of greed? Is there more than one kind of greed? Is greed just this one big thing? Or what's he talking about? What are the different kinds of greeds and the kind of influence that it has on our life? I mean, I think the general thing is greed for money, right? And we all kind of understand that. Could there be possibly greed of children? Greed for family? Maybe greed for your work? I don't know. And I think we have to kind of think that through. What does Jesus mean here when he says greed, all kinds of different greed? I think our world would have us believe that greed is actually good. And whether we admit it or not, we kind of, have that thought. And it was expressed in an old movie, Wall Street, with Michael Douglas and Charlie Sheen, where the main character comes out and says, greed is good. Anybody remember that movie? Anybody? Peter admitted, I know you remember that movie. You're old. That's why. Right? But it was a cool movie. And in this movie, the main character, as he gives a speech to a workshop for people how to make money, and these workshops still go on, right? He says this. He says, ladies and gentlemen, greed, for the lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. Greed in all of its forms, greed for life, greed for money, greed for love, knowledge, has marked the upward surge of mankind. And, and the movie goes on. And at the end, what we see is that the lives of the people who buy into this, that their lives really fall apart. Right? And that's what we see. Which makes me ask the question, does greed really work? Because I really believe that many people are living by that standard. Next slide shows a lot of people in our world who have expressed greed in one form or another. Right? And you can kind of identify and think about those. In the real world, I think wealth or greed has a much more negative effect on the people who are being greedy, on their families, and even on the communities that they live in. I think that's why Jesus gives a strong warning against the belief that wealth can secure one's life, future, and the sense of peace in their life. So many of us think, if I just have this, I'll be okay. My life will be okay. Right? Whether it's money, house, car, whatever it is. If I just have this. That's kind of our mentality. But Jesus says on the second part of that verse that I read, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. We may think it does. And I know that my life is filled with junk and clutter. And my house becomes a living metaphor of this. I have to clean out our house of stuff all the time. Anybody else like that here? Like you go on for 6 months, a year, and then you look around your house and it's like, oh my gosh, where did all this stuff come from? My wife likes to say that, the only way you know how to clean a house is by giving things away. And And I wanted to come back at her, but I was like, I think that's kind of true, right? I just like to push stuff out. How many of you in your homes are this way? I like to, make that my personal confession. Maybe some of us can be honest about it too. And one of the things that we have to understand is possessions don't give a sense of peace in life. No matter how much we have, we are never at peace. We're never at a point where we say, oh, that's good. My life is complete now. I can do other stuff, right? The more you have, the more worries you have. Isn't that true? And the more worries, the more stress. Life is so stressful. And I think that's one of the reasons why Jesus said this. One's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. And Jesus says that his followers, all of us, are not meant to live about worrying in life, about life. Not even the necessities of life. Not even about what we will eat or what we will wear. Jesus said, don't worry about it. You know what? Your life is going to have enough stuff. And I think that's the reality for most of us. Some of us, maybe not. But at least when I look around this room, most of us, that's already a reality. And then towards the end of the second half of chapter 12, we haven't even gotten to the passage for today. We'll get there. Jesus says, instead of living like this, all stressed out, trying to get stuff into your life, he says, instead, strive for the kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Right? And as he says this, we come into the passage for today. So listen for the word of the Lord. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Be dressed for action and have your lamps lit. Be like those who are waiting for their master to return from the wedding banquet so that they may open the door for him as soon as he comes and knocks. Blessed are those slaves whom the master finds alert when he comes. Truly I tell you, he will fasten his belt and have them sit to eat, and he will come and serve them. For if he comes during the middle of the night or near dawn and finds them so, blessed are those slaves. But know this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. The word of the Lord. Now, we've come to today's passage now with the background of chapter 12. And as we see this, Jesus tells the disciples how to live against the influence of greed, how to live against the influence of wealth. Because when we fall into that, we no longer have peace, but we have stress. But instead, Jesus wants us to live in faith and in peace. And he says, and we've got this maxim here, and maxim, I understand it to be just a general truth or a kind of a rule of conduct, right? He says, sell your possessions and give alms. Meaning, sell your alms is helping the poor, right? Or giving money to the poor, which was a common practice during Jesus' time. People would line up by the temple, and people would be going by and they would put money into the poor's, whether it's a bowl or hands. It means sell your possessions and help the poor. I don't know about you, but these words to me are tough. And I think a lot of us live with guilt and shame when we hear these words, or we actually just ignore them. Because so many of us are well off. We go, I don't know how to handle these words. What does it mean? Do I need to go out and sell my house, sell my car, sell everything and give it to the poor and help the poor? Right? So we've got to ask some questions. First thing is, are we supposed to sell everything we own? Right? Right? Is that a fair question? Second thing is, are we supposed to give everything we have to the poor? And I think that's a pretty fair question. And I want to look at what Jesus means when he says, sell your possessions and give alms. And before I even look into the background to what's happening here, I want to say that this is in no way to excuse any greed in our life or the lack of helping the poor in our life. Because I think most of us sitting here, we are able and capable of helping the poor much more than we actually do, including myself. That's what I find myself all the time. Go, I could be doing a little bit more, but usually something else gets my attention or influences me where I don't. So having said that, Jesus says, sell your possessions. And this is in connection with what Jesus was talking about at the beginning of chapter 12, right? When he says, take care, be on guard of all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. So what Jesus sees here is that possessions have a way of making us feel like that by having these things, we can have peace, that we can have security. And because there's a story that goes along in chapter 12 where this man is talking to himself and he's like, I have so much stuff. He doesn't even have other people around him to talk to anymore. So he's kind of talking to himself in his thoughts and goes, I've got all this stuff. What should I do with it? I know I'll tear down my small barn. I'll build a bigger barn and I can store everything there. And I have so much stuff. I can eat, drink, and be merry. And I don't have to worry about my life anymore, right? So Jesus uses that and he says, life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. It is not what gives us peace. It is not what secures our life. The things that mistakenly we trust to give us life, peace, Jesus says to all of those things, sell them, get rid of them, because they are all lies. The only thing that can give you peace in life, the only thing that can give you assurance in life is God. So he says, strive for the kingdom. To me, when I think about what Jesus says, Jesus is actually freeing us when he says, sell your possessions. Those things that are holding you captive, those things that give you a false understanding, Jesus, I want to set you free. And to do that, you've got to get rid of them in your life. Sell them, get rid of them. And to me, that makes sense. And he says, and then take those things and help the poor. And in doing so, now you are freeing them from poverty. You are freeing them from whatever is holding them in bondage. Even when the Bible talks about showing hospitality or giving alms, there's actually always a mark of a healthy boundary, right? So anybody here feeling guilty like, but I live in a nice home. I drive a car that's better than Fred's. Maybe I should give it to Fred. Right? Do you feel that guilt, anybody? Anybody go through that struggle? I want to set you free. Don't feel guilty, because we are all meant to have healthy boundaries. And you've got to determine what that healthy boundary is, right? You've got to determine, oh my gosh, let me just tell you a little side story about my car. My car's about 11, 12 years old. I have a Toyota Highlander, which I think is awesome. I mean, I love it. A couple years ago, do you guys know what a cargo mat is? You know, when you're in a SUV, your back seat folds down and you have like a rubber mat, right? And you can put cargo stuff in there. I love my car. I love my little rubber mats. You know, instead of the carpet mats, I have rubber mats. And in my cargo area, I had a rubber cargo mat. I was so happy. But 2 years ago, it disappeared. And I'm like, what the heck? Where did it go? And I'm thinking, the youth. It's got to be the youth, right? The youth took it, right? Because I'm thinking, I do a whole bunch of stuff with the youth in the summer. But the youth are like, no, we didn't touch it. I'm like, dang it. I'm thinking it's probably when I was giving them rides or, we're hauling stuff in my car back and forth. And for 2 years, my life, there's been like this hole, like something is just missing, my cargo mat. And then this year when I went to Mattawa, we were sleeping in Son and Kate's warehouse, right? And I sleep with the youth. I sleep with the boys, they're playing, I sleep right there. And in their warehouse, I'm looking around, we're having lunch or something, and I look around, and under this pile of stuff, I see this little outline of a black rubber mat. And I'm like, wait a minute, I think that's my cargo mat. And, I go over there and I take out, and it's my cargo mat. I'm like, oh my gosh, the youth brought it to Mattawa and never brought it back to me. I was like, oh, my life is complete now. Oh, my gosh. Boundaries, right? Not to let not youth into your life, but talking about boundaries. Going back to boundaries. The Bible talks about having boundaries in our life. What's healthy? You've got to determine that. A good example that whether it's the Jewish tradition or Christians use and scholars look at is Genesis 18 about Abraham. Can you guys see that? You can't see that? Then you need to come closer because your eyes are getting old. Okay? Kind of see it? You won't admit you can't see it. But in this story, this is a story about when Abraham and Sarah, they don't have any children yet. They're out. They pitch their tent. This is their home. And 3 strangers come by. And what we see in this story is actually the standard of showing hospitality or giving help to those who are in need. And we sometimes don't recognize it. But what we see here is the oldest tradition. And this is all in line with creating boundaries, right? To show that you got to have healthy boundaries, even when you help people in need, inviting them into your life, whether it's handing out money. The first thing is that we see here, and I highlighted some things in yellow for you. It says, there were 3 men standing near him. And it was the tradition of Jesus' time that even when you were in need, you didn't actually go up to somebody and say, hey, Jay, I need somewhere to stay. Can I stay at your place? Or, somebody you didn't know. What was the tradition was that people who needed a place to stay would go and stand in a public place or in front of somebody, right, that you thought was capable of helping you, but you wouldn't say anything. And if the person who saw those people in need felt that they could help that person, they would approach and say, hey, let me show you some hospitality. Right? So that's one of the first things. And the second thing is, there was a standard of showing hospitality. And this standard was it wasn't set very high because, you got to slay a couple of chicken, you got to bring this and this and this. It wasn't very elaborate because the tradition didn't want it to be a burden to the person who is being shown hospitality. So it was very simple, and we see it here. And Abraham says to these travelers, let me bring you a little water. Let me help you to rest under this tree. Let me bring you a little bread to eat. And then afterwards, you can pass. See, what we see in the tradition is Abraham sets very clear boundaries. He himself and Sarah have a tent, but he doesn't know these travelers. I don't know if they're marauders who are going to kill us and take all of our possession, but I want to show them hospitality. I feel some connection with them, and I'm in a situation where I can. So let me show them some hospitality. He doesn't invite them into his tent. He says, come under this tree. Let me give you some water that you may wash and drink. Let me bring you a little bread that you may eat, right? And these people don't have animals, but it was tradition that if the travelers had animals, that they would also be given water and rest. So Abraham shows hospitality. And as the guests are eating, the story says that Abraham stood by them under the tree while they ate, like a good host, right? And as part of that tradition, one of the things in return that the people who are receiving hospitality would do is, because they've been traveling, they would share news from other towns or what was happening in the community with the hosts because they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have TVs, right? So they would share news that way. And Another thing that they would do is if they had something in their bag that they were carrying, they would reciprocate their kindness by sharing something that they've picked up in their travels. Or they would give the host a blessing, and which is what we see in Abraham and Sarah's life. One of these three guests comes and says, "Let me bless you." And he says, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife, Sarah, shall have a son." And that's the blessing. I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse, because Abraham and Sarah are close to 100 by this time. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, is that really a blessing? Right? But he blesses them. And they go on. And what happens towards the end is that, and this is something that I learned in my life. I come from a family where my mom was like a North Korean communist when she raised us. She was like so strict with us, right? When guests would come over, we would all have to line up and say hello, in the traditional way. And when they're leaving, my mom would say, "Guests are leaving," and we'd all run up and we'd all line up again and we'd have to, "Oh, thank you for coming." And as they go out the front door to their cars, we would all have to kind of, march out there. And as they get into their car and leave, we would once again have to bow and say, "Oh, thank you for coming, goodbye." And if they wave, we have to say our final goodbye, because you want to be the last one to say goodbye, right? So I grew up with that. And what we see here is, listen to this, in verse 16. When the guests are leaving and they were going to the next town, Abraham went with them to set them on their way. And that was part of the tradition, right? And go, oh, my mom she wasn't being communist, she was being biblical. Well, what we see in Abraham's life are healthy boundaries. I don't know what healthy boundaries are for you, but all of us need to struggle with that to create those healthy boundaries, that if we are a people with abundance of things, that we help the poor. Jesus says, sell your possessions, meaning get rid of the things that you depend on to give you life, future, and peace, because they do not. Only God can do that. And focus instead on helping the poor, the traveler, the resident alien. There's a concept of resident aliens in the Bible. People who were not of that country or that people, but entered that community to work and to live. And they were to be treated with respect and with dignity. Right? So there's a whole law around that too. And which makes me think about, how do we deal with the resident aliens in our life, in our community today? Right? It's been an old tradition to give alms, meaning to help the poor. Not only a tradition, it's our calling. But I really believe we have to be wise. We have to practice it all the time, but we have to be wise. Because literally, when we try to help the poor, there are always wolves in sheep's clothing, right? Getting in our way, pulling us away, pretending to be the poor. So many things. How do we navigate ourselves through all of that? Are there other ways? And here's the thing. As we have an abundance, we have the opportunity to use our creativity, to come together as people and have fun doing this, that, whatever this is that God is calling us to. What is that? Here's some ways that all of us can participate. Let's see the next slide. We just got back from Mattawa a couple weeks ago, and a lot of us going to the dentist is no big deal. Whenever our tooth or whatever hurts, we go, oh yeah, let me go to the dentist. For a migrant community, that's actually really hard, right? So our church, we get dentists, and some of these dentists are not even our church people, but they wanted to partner with us, and they came. And Dr. Nee, who is, I don't even know if Dr. Nee is here today, but she's fun, she's funny, but not all the time. She goes, Pastor Fred, you get in the chair. I'm like, oh, and then all the doctors grab tools and act like they're going to do something to me. I'm like, right? But how incredible. Our church provides the van, our dentists go, and we help those who are in need, right? And Dr. Yudi, who is gone now, who was at the breakfast worship, when she saw this, she screamed out, "We couldn't have done it without Ben." Ben's not a dentist, but, he speaks Spanish. And I don't know how he speaks Spanish, but he speaks Spanish. So he was like in the triage, receiving people, getting their information, figuring out, who they need to see and all this stuff. It was awesome, right? Tina was there. She's not a dentist, but she's a nurse, and she's working at the triage, right? And to me, it was so exciting and fun to see all of you working to help. Right? And there are so many ways to help. Let's look at the next slide. This year we did so many different stuff. And there are so many opportunities for us to help. I think we just have to recognize it. We had the opportunity to work with the Catholic community, Catholic Hispanic community in Mattawa, and Father Alex and the bishop, they invited me to come to their worship as they were going to lead it in an area where the migrant workers were living. And you can see that there are 2 buildings, and more than 180 migrant workers live there in bunk beds. They're like, just cots and rooms with bunk beds, and that's where they live. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And there's nothing else out there except orchards and vineyards. So they've got nothing else to do except work and stay here. I'm like, oh my gosh. Is there an opportunity here? Is there something we can do here? And Son let me know later that by closer to where he is, there's another one of these housing areas that houses over 500, close to like 600, yes, right? Over 500 people. And as we were driving away from this living area, one of the people that hosts us there, he was driving us around. And Son and I went and visited. So 3 of us are coming back. And I was just kind of thinking, what do we just experience here? Tony kind of looks over at us and goes, "This is modern day slavery." I thought, whoa, right? It was incredible. What can we do? Next, let's look at the next slide. I think one of the greatest things that we can do is work together, right? And we have. I don't know if you can see some pictures there. You go, oh, that's not for me. Maybe, this year when we went to Mattawa, we had grown-ups go, parents go. Jay and Stella took a week off from work to go with us to Mattawa, right? They took a week off, took their vacation time to go to Mattawa. And Jay and Stella, along with Kate, our host, their main responsibility, cook. That's all they did. They cooked for our youth and our adults who were there, and that's how they served. It was awesome, right? What a young, do you guys see Young on the guy up there who's just eating? Yeah, he's awesome at that. He was like he moved our group around, and he's so good with kids. Like activities. He wanted to give our youth all the experience that they wanted, so he's like, let's go here, let's go climb this mountain, let's go do this. Even the kids were like, we're tired. Please stop, Uncle Young, please stop, right? It was awesome. Kids did a car wash to help the police department because the police department's not funded enough. Kids did a vacation Bible school. And I really think when we come together and become excited about doing what we're supposed to do, about living the way that we're supposed to live, it really does become contagious. And Tony, I don't know if you can see Tony there. Do you see Tony cooking with son? Tony said, he appreciated us, but I just love the guy. He goes, let me do dinner for you guys. And he did tacos for us. And it was awesome. Right? It becomes contagious and people want to join in to help their own community and to see what can develop there. And Tony and the people that we were working with were so excited. Kate is responsible for doing lunch. She volunteered to do lunch in September 8th. And you know what the locals in Mattawa said? We'll come do lunch with Kate. So Tony, on September, you got to mark it down right now. September 8th, Tony is going to be here to do tacos. It's awesome. And then other people, are the other people coming too? And then another family said, well, Tony's doing tacos. We'll come and do tamales. And let me tell you, I had some fresh tamales in Mattawa. It's nothing like what we get here. It was actually fresh. And it was so good, right? But they're excited. They want to come visit us. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that the way that we should live life? To be excited, right? Building relationships with each other, recognizing the value of each other. How about, there's other ways for you to serve and to help. Is there another slide? Mike Pack is going to be coming up. They're already back there. He's been leading a team of people to Guatemala for 5 years. Every year he's gone. He's taken a week off, and I know he's a busy guy, to go to Guatemala, not only go, to lead that team. And he has been so influential in having people experience what it's like in other parts of the world and how we can get plugged in and what we can do, right? But Mike, I'm going to, as I continue to talk, Mike and all the people who are going to Guatemala, I want to invite you to come on up. So, and then Mike's going to recognize you guys, but everybody can start coming up.